The sun had already begun its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across the playground as Emma sat alone on a worn green bench, clutching the frayed straps of her red backpack. Her legs swung just above the ground, unable to reach, her small frame dwarfed by the bench and the towering trees around her. She wiped her nose with her sleeve, trying to be brave, just like her mommy always told her. But the truth was, Emma was scared. Hours had passed since her mother left her there, telling her in a soft, rushed voice, "Wait here, sweetie. Mommy just needs to run a quick errand." That was 3 popsicles, 2 juice boxes, and 1 stuffed rabbit ago. The snacks were gone. The rabbit, worn and floppy, sat in her lap. But her mother? Nowhere. She had tried to stay strong at first, staring at the swing set, pretending she was just waiting her turn. But as the sun slipped lower and the other kids were called home by their parents, Emma's bravery faded into quiet, wet sobs. Nobody seemed to notice her. A jogger passed. A man pushing a stroller glanced her way and kept going. Emma hugged her knees tighter. She didn't know where she lived anymore. Her mom had been moving her from place to place, motels, shelters, sometimes sleeping in the car. She had no school, no friends, and worst of all, no daddy. Her mother had never spoken his name. Just called him, the soldier who left us. Now, sitting alone in a strange park in a strange town, Emma wished more than anything that she had someone, anyone, who would come for her. A kind face. A warm hand. A safe place to go. She tried whispering to her bunny, pretending it could talk back and tell her what to do. But it was no use. Her throat was dry, her stomach aching, and the chill in the air crept into her bones. As a wind gust sent leaves swirling past her feet, Emma blinked through her tears, hugging her rabbit tighter. She was just about to close her eyes and pretend she was invisible when a low growl sounded nearby, and a man's shadow fell across her. She looked up, startled, not knowing her life was about to change forever. Jason Hayes had never intended to stop at the park that afternoon. He was just passing through on his daily walk with Tank, his massive pit bull rescue. It was part of his routine, a ritual that helped keep the past at bay. Years in the military had left Jason with a scar under his right eye and more wounds that couldn't be seen. Life back home had been quiet since he got discharged. He lived alone in a small apartment, worked as a mechanic during the week, and mostly kept to himself. But something about the silence in the park that day felt off, too still, too sad. That's when he saw her. A little girl, alone on a bench, red-eyed and shivering slightly. Jason slowed, his instincts kicking in. He wasn't a man who interfered in other people's business, but this was different. There was no parent in sight. The girl wasn't playing. She was holding a rabbit so tight its ears bent sideways. Tank, ever intuitive, let out a low whimper and pulled gently toward her. Jason stopped a few feet away, crouched down beside the bench to not scare her, and spoke gently. "Hey there, kiddo, are you okay?" The girl flinched slightly but didn't run. That was a good sign. She sniffled, then whispered, "My mommy left me here. She said she'd come back, but it's been a long time." Jason's throat tightened. He took a slow breath, struggling to steady the pounding in his chest. Something about her face was hauntingly familiar, the shape of her eyes, the tiny dimple in her chin. He swallowed hard. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. Jason's vision blurred for a second. That was the name. The name he'd held onto for years. The child his ex had carried when she vanished, pregnant, into the wind without a trace. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. She'd taken his baby and disappeared. He'd looked. Oh God, how he'd looked. Emma. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his wallet and pulled out an old, creased photograph. "Do you recognize this lady?" he asked, voice cracking. Emma leaned forward, eyes wide. "That's Mommy," she said. Jason's world tilted. This wasn't a coincidence. This was his daughter. The name echoed in Jason's mind like a thunderclap. Emma. All these years, he had imagined what his child might look like, if she even existed. His ex had refused to let him be a part of her pregnancy. One day, she was at his apartment with a growing belly, the next, she was gone. No forwarding address, no calls, no notes. He'd hired a private investigator, filed missing person reports, checked hospitals. Nothing. And now, here she was, right in front of him, fragile and scared, with the same hazel eyes that used to stare back at him from the mirror when he was a boy. He wanted to scoop her into his arms right then and there, but he knew better than to frighten her. Before he could say more, the moment was interrupted. Two older boys, maybe 12 or 13, sauntered up laughing obnoxiously, their bikes tossed haphazardly on the path. One of them pointed at Emma's stuffed rabbit and sneered, "Nice bunny, baby. You cryin' for your mommy?" The other one laughed and mockingly wiped imaginary tears from his cheeks. Emma shrank back, clutching her rabbit, and her lip trembled again. Jason stood slowly. His posture shifted from calm to commanding in an instant. His voice boomed across the playground like a clap of thunder. "Hey," he bellowed, and every head turned. "That's my daughter." The boys froze, wide-eyed, their cocky grins vanishing. One of them stammered, "We were just," but Jason stepped forward, eyes hard, voice low now, full of steel. "Walk away. Now." The boys didn't wait for another warning, they grabbed their bikes and pedaled off like their lives depended on it. Jason knelt beside Emma, his voice soft again. "You're safe now. I promise." She looked at him with cautious wonder, like she didn't quite understand why this stranger cared so much. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a granola bar and a bottle of water. "Let's get you warmed up, okay?" Emma nodded slowly and whispered, "You really think I'm your daughter?" Jason's voice cracked. "Sweetheart. I don't just think. I know." She smiled for the first time that day, and without a word, scooted closer to him. In that instant, Jason knew, his life had just started again. The next few days unfolded like something from a dream, equal parts surreal, emotional, and healing. Jason contacted the local police immediately after taking Emma home that evening, providing the photo, the child statements, and every bit of evidence he could offer. Authorities opened a child welfare case, and within 48 hours, they confirmed what Jason already knew deep in his soul: a DNA test proved Emma was his biological daughter. The news floored him, not just because it was official, but because it meant he hadn't been crazy to believe all these years that his child was out there, waiting for him. Emma's mother, they discovered, had been living under false names, bouncing between states, shelters, and eventually falling into drugs and dangerous company. She disappeared again, this time likely for good. But Jason wasn't angry. Not now. All that mattered was the tiny girl asleep in the next room, wrapped in a cozy blanket, Tank curled protectively at her feet. Jason turned Emma's new room into a small haven, soft blankets, nightlights, shelves for her bunny and a growing collection of books. They developed routines, pancakes every Saturday morning, walks with Tank, bedtime stories by flashlight. The shadows under her eyes slowly faded. The nervous glances became trusting smiles. And Jason, who once thought his heart had hardened beyond repair, found himself checking on her every hour at night, just to make sure she was still breathing, still safe, still his. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft purples and golds, Emma tiptoed into the living room where Jason sat dozing on the couch. She climbed onto his lap without a word, rested her head on his chest, and whispered, "I used to wish for a daddy. I think God was just making sure I got the best one." Jason didn't speak. He couldn't. Tears filled his eyes as he wrapped his arms around her, silently promising that she'd never be left behind again. In a world full of noise, chaos, and pain, their little apartment had become something sacred. Safe. Warm. Whole. For the first time in both their lives, they belonged. Together, they were no longer broken pieces. They were home.